Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Project Apple, Project Renaissance, even Project Bird. It may not be obvious what that means, but when ribbons are cut and jobs announced, we know our chambers are hard at work in the Carolinas. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Dr. Cheryl Richards, filling in for Chris William, and today's show is about more than foods, fantasies, or fowl. Our chiefs of chambers have much to say about incentives, investments, and infrastructure, playing political cards, developing the workforce, and lobbying legislatures to create communities where people want to live, work, and play. Stay tuned. Project Chamber is about to begin.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded September 27th, 2013. On this week's program, Pat Danahy of Greensboro Partnership, Brad Dean of the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, Ben Haskew of the Greenville Chamber of Commerce, and Harvey Schmitt of the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce.
Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to have you all here today, and we know that Ike is recovering well, and glad to hear of that. So glad that we have all of you around the table today. Should we talk about some projects?
Absolutely.
Sure. Let's have a conversation. So let's start with maybe innovation and the role that innovation plays in your daily work as we start thinking about bringing jobs to new areas and then setting in place the policies that allow those jobs to grow and actually come to fruition. So.
Well, I tell you, I mean, we're in a position being close to Clemson University, which is generating a lot of research to create a real entrepreneurial ecosystem so that entrepreneurs who are interested in research that's coming from Clemson, as well as other major universities and organizations, have facilities, capital, support so that they can start businesses, grow businesses. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation and entrepreneurship in our part of the upstate of South Carolina.
I think traditionally those of us in this part of the country have been able to benefit from a lot of relocating businesses. I think the recession has slowed that kind of development down considerably. And as a result, I think both communities and organizations such as ours are focused on innovation as a way in which to create job opportunities. And what you're seeing are a lot of young people who may have traditionally jumped into some career path with a large corporation or in some field that now find that looking at an entrepreneurial opportunity is a better path for them. So it's not unusual. I was at a football game a couple of weeks ago and ran to a young man from NC State University who was busy on some entrepreneurial trip trying to create a new product dealing with electric cigarettes. So, it really, the innovation's taking place in lots of different areas, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for it happening.
So do you think we're well positioned, because innovation is one thing, but then becoming an entrepreneur and actually then growing a business and having the incentives and the support and the tax breaks and the capital, access to capital is another component of it. Do you feel like we're well positioned to grow that in North and South Carolina?
Well, the way I see it, and back to Harvey's point, our states have traditionally been states where our economic development policy has been around recruiting businesses from the outside. I know in South Carolina, we really lack the incentives that really can bolster entrepreneurism and innovation. It took us 3 years to get an angel investment bill, which is comparable to North Carolina and Georgia, passed through our General Assembly. We've got to do more of that because, you know, all businesses start small, and somewhere there's going to be a business that's going to take off, it's going to grow rapidly, it's going to create wealth, and it's going to become a headquarters.
Do you think incentives are really the key, though, or is there anything else at play?
No, I think what you see from an innovation point of view is growing from the smaller, not smaller, but cities rather than states. And I think you'll see the investment as it goes forward. But with the recession and what we've endured from an economic development point of view, a number of people are looking at that. There's another thing at work too, I think, and it's science and information technology. We're looking at, I think, in the future, science being brought to bear, information technology being brought to bear, which is an innovation type of thing, as opposed to something that comes from a raw material. So I think where we are in the history of the way our economy works, and then the needs brought about by the economy in our country for a while are generating interest.
Incentives are a necessary evil in economic development today, but at the end of the day, that's not the way a community or an industry wins. You've got to be willing to innovate. I think today the Carolinas are better positioned than ever before, in part because we have such great research universities in the Carolinas. And today, a small business can oftentimes react and innovate quicker than big businesses. And today, innovation is a necessary component to business success.
I would add one particular item is that outside of the incentive business, what's really, I think, feeding the energy and the innovation is the sort of culture and ecosystems that are beginning to build around them. So, for instance, American Underground has been very successful in Durham, and as a result, there are a number of support agencies and activities that have begun to position themselves in the same location, so an entrepreneur gets a variety of services in one location. Likewise, American Underground has now moved into Raleigh, and we have Raleigh HQ, which is another hub of entrepreneurship. And by putting all of these folks together, they attract support. The universities, the community colleges, and others are providing additional help. And ultimately, I think that is what is fueling the energy in the innovation area as opposed to outside incentive process.
That's an important point, too, as far as attracting talent. Our program is called NEXT, and we have 124 technology, biomedical, and other types of small businesses that are involved there. And when they're in aggregate, they can recruit more talent, they're creative amongst themselves, and as Harvey said, they're getting resources brought because they are, aligned and working together.
The 20 to 34-year-old group is a demographic that we've identified and focused on in terms of keeping them there and attracting them. And this type of environment does so, I think, much more so than was the case 10 or 15 years ago. If you're going to attract your young talent to keep them there, you're going to have this type of activity going on.
Well, right, because young people who want to align with something that they know is successful and where there's energy and creativity. So how did we get to this point where now we're finding droves of 24 to 30-year-olds who are moving into both of the Carolinas, one, for the climate and the quality of life and all the other things that we support. But you've had some pretty good success with the Enterprise campus.
Right. Just one of the things that we're doing, but some of the ideas actually are coming from these young entrepreneurs. We've started the process of creating, again, our brand, the Next Charter High School, where project-based learning is going to come into play for a very different classroom setting, solutions-oriented kids who will go through a curriculum that's internet-based, and hopefully we're going to launch that school within a year or so. Have the charter approval now. The Enterprise campus is another variation, a part of Greenville Tech. We just got a $25 million local bond issue passed for this, where we're going to put advanced manufacturing, very important for our area, to create a skilled group of people to go into that field. And we're going to bring in prototype manufacturing, companies that don't want to shut down lines to create this prototyping, and entrepreneurs too, all under one roof.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the college, the technical college system in South Carolina, the community college system in North Carolina, and how that feeds for workforce development. So I think now the conversation at the table is, are those destination campuses where the training and the skill development then leads to a workforce need in your community, or are they seen as these bridge programs to then lead to the four-year institutions and take, the core courses at a lower cost and move on? So, strong opinions?
From a comprehensive point of view, you have to start with the industries that you have there have got to define what they need. And if you don't do that in the beginning, then you're struggling from the get-go. We have set up the workforce circles for the clusters that we have identified that we can compete on a global basis 20, 30 years in the future. So with those working, then you get the information, and CEOs tend to talk about what they don't have in terms of the workforce. But when you get down to the real details, they don't know exactly what they don't have. And they may have people in their plants asking for this type of expertise, et cetera. But in addition to that, they need 2 years or 5 years experience. So the community colleges are delivering. There are no jobs, and the workforce, or the companies don't realize that. So the communication between the companies and the education system, which includes K through 12, the community colleges, which are an incredibly important part of it, and in higher education too. And if the whole system aligns and listens to what's needed, then you begin to develop the pathways. An issue that we have too, the basic manufacturing economy that was our backbone for years is essentially in a whole different place now. It hasn't gone away, but it's just not there. So you have parents and students that don't have a good view of advanced manufacturing. If you say manufacturing, they run away from it. So there's got to be an education process there. And then you need the pathways. We just, the chamber, in addition to a group of the presidents and chancellors of the universities there, put together a STEM early college. And we raised $1 million in about 4 months in order to put this in place. And it's a collaboration between the public school system and North Carolina A&T State University. And you have high school freshmen in with college folks for 4 years. And they graduate with STEM credentials in 4 years with 2 years of college credit. So you got a tremendous deal, and then in addition to that, we're working on the pathways to get so that students in the 9th grade can begin to look at what they want to do and follow, see where they go. And then the public school, the K through 12, is really a critical piece, because for us, the product coming out of there doesn't meet the standards that it needs to for the most part. So how do you get there? And that's a critical part for us. We go all the way back to pre-K, if you will. And if kids are coming to school without the ability to be able to learn, be in a position to learn, ones that are disadvantaged for one reason or another, they haven't been nurtured, et cetera, and they can't communicate. If they can't read by the time they're in the 3rd grade, then they usually can't get there. Right. So this whole system needs to work together. Communication is, and not just coming in contact with one another. You've got to communicate in order to make it work.
So let's talk about those legislative priorities, because what you've just described, I think we take a step backwards across the Carolinas, where we're headed with our investment in early childhood education and programs that allow us to develop those. So how do we get out of that cycle that we're in and get back to what you've just described?
Well, I think there's some challenge in all of that. I'm a firm believer in early childhood education, and I think what's happened, the good conversation that's taking place in the state right now is trying to establish that alignment. I think the governor's talked about getting everybody out of their silos, working together, beginning to go from the bottom to the top, and to think through that process. The flip side of that conversation is the legislature has been very much focused on trying to drive down costs to taxpayers, and to some extent that puts increasing pressure on the amount of available dollars to be put in things like early childhood education or teacher pay or whatever the case might be. And I don't know that we've completely figured out what that balance is and how we reconcile all of those challenges. I think as we've come out of this most recent legislative session, that's one of the bigger conundrums. And then the state is really struggling with growing Medicaid expenses. So you've got all of that coming in on one side, and it's competing with the demand that you have for funding education. and a general view that we shouldn't let government grow any larger than it is. And there's a lot of squeeze in that space. And I think one of the big challenges that the legislature and the governor are going to face is how to create a balance that allows the state to continue to move forward.
I think, in the case of education, clearly early education and particularly early childhood education is critically important. But it seems like in recent years we've let money become the main objective in a lot of this. And frankly, that's not the biggest challenge in education. I think we spent a lot of years when the efforts of No Child Left Behind, and that ended up being a mad dash to mediocrity for a lot of school districts. I think one of the greatest initiatives in the Carolinas right now is Common Core. That's certainly going to open up new and better education environments for a lot of our children who desperately need that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to get back to that alignment that you've talked about, bringing things closer. What about internships? We hear a lot about internships and the opportunity for high school age children, even middle school age children, to start developing that interest in a particular career. Because you're right, the manufacturing floor that you grew up in is very different than the manufacturing of today.
They're a tremendous opportunity. Another little story that we ran into, the interns, and you get the programs set up so they come out of the college and university. We're extraordinarily fortunate for a community of 280,000 people. We have, with the 7 colleges and universities within our city limits, 47,000 college students that have never been really taken advantage of from the economic development point of view. In any event, lost my
It's okay. I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, and you'll come back to your thought, I know, Pat. One of the things we've done in Greenville is really a cool idea called Dream Connectors. And Michelin North America, that's headquartered in Greenville, and BMW and Greenville Health System were some of the early organizations that volunteered their folks to go into middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and talk about career paths. Our school districts give out a brochure that says, here are the 16 career paths. But we have some in Greenville that are thriving, and those are ones we want to talk about. But to take the mystique out of what are some of these career opportunities and to actually meet people who are in those careers and begin to, for the student to visualize what that career path to look like. And we're getting more and more companies that want to do this. It was mentioned earlier, there's so much about just the communication, whether it's early childhood, K through 12, higher education, just all working together. And I guess in Greenville, one of the things we're trying to do is just pull them all together.
The story I got left on was a supervisor who was convinced to take, or he didn't really want to take the students that were there to be mentored. And he said, I don't have time to fool with them. And after they finally convinced him to do it, one go-round, he wanted all they could get, because what happens was that he would have them trained, and then they'd come back to work, and he couldn't see that in the beginning. So the communication piece and the understanding of how it works is incredibly important for the mentoring programs to work the way they ought to.
I think certainly once you see the employers who get their ROI and they understand that it starts early on while they're not paying them, it certainly makes a difference. I want to come back to something you said, Harvey, about kind of the priorities of where the tax base is going. And so we've talked about education here for a little bit. We haven't talked at all about transportation, infrastructure, healthcare, anything else. So when you put all of these competing priorities on the table and you're out there selling the Carolinas as an attractive place to live, work, and do business, where do you think we need to focus our priorities?
Well, it's a very good question, and you're trying to create great value at an affordable price. I've been in the business a long time, and the top 3 things for chambers of commerce, as long as I can remember, have been job creation and retention, workforce preparation through education, and transportation. Transportation today is as much about moving goods and services as it is moving people so that they can enjoy the life quality they come to the state for. I think the state has done in North Carolina an extremely good job on the transportation issue this year. I think the improvements that came in the reform bill that were a bipartisan pass create an opportunity for the state to begin to allocate resources based on the specific rational review of needs. So it's less political and a lot more based on where the need is. The healthcare issue, I think, as I mentioned before, is a big challenge, and as we get into Medicare expenses and those continuing to grow, that's going to be a big challenge. And it's hard, I think, from a political standpoint, to ignore that space, and that's going to crowd out investment in the other areas. And then in North Carolina, we're having a big conversation about how we do economic development and where we're willing to make investments in that space, how we make those investments, public-private effort in terms of the Department of Commerce, and then the question of incentives. And all of that is on the table. I think for the first time in the 20 years that I've been here, almost every puzzle piece is in play. And there's, I think, a prioritization process going on. And I'm not certain where that's all going to stop at this point.
Just one comment from North Carolina's point of view, and the gas tax that is a fundamental piece just doesn't work anymore. And there needs to be a completely a reformulation of that. That's a challenge for us. We talk about it on a regular basis. There isn't a plan laid out to do that,
Well,
and that needs to happen.
You know, and in South Carolina, we haven't raised the gas tax in 25 years. And if we had the gas tax North Carolina has, we'd have $700 million more a year to take care of roads and bridges. And in our part of the state, you know, it's not unlike, I'm sure, Brad, over in Myrtle Beach. You know, roads are essential. I mean, we're putting 60% of the goods through the Port of Charleston, which is a 3.5-hour drive down I-26. And so we've got to have good roads, good bridges. And we took a first step this past legislative session. We got a bond bill, first time a bond bill had been passed in a long time, $500 million. And what we were able to piece together gave us a total of about $800 million. But we need a lot more consistent over time, and we're going to have to look at funding for roads as a critical thing going forward. But you know, as Harvey said, it's all about balance and the trade-offs. You know, a couple of years ago, we saw the need to deepen the port in Charleston, not knowing what the federal government might do. So our state was able to set aside $300 million to deepen the port, so that we're competitive on the East Coast with the ships that will be coming through the Panama Canal once that expansion is complete.
Infrastructure is so key, not only to economic development, but to quality of life. And you're right. I mean, South Carolina did answer that challenge somewhat this year, but sadly, South Carolina is spending pennies when we should be investing dollars. And I'm always encouraged when I drive across the border to North Carolina, because I think the state motto in North Carolina ought to be under construction, because you're actually investing in that infrastructure. And it's not just about roads. We've got to maintain the roads we've got. We need to expand interstates like I-73. We need to deepen the Port of Charleston and also expand the Port of Georgetown. But frankly, neither one of our states can be afforded to be left out of that discussion about high-speed rail, which will be critical to infrastructure for many years to come.
Absolutely. So we have a couple minutes remaining, and I don't want to leave sight of the topic that is looming upon us next Tuesday, D-Day, October 1st, with affordable health care. So any predictions? Why don't we have health exchanges in North and South Carolina? What are your predictions going forward?
I think the one thing we can all be certain of is there is absolutely nothing affordable about the Affordable Care Act. This is really going to be devastating to a lot of businesses, and we needed to reform the healthcare system. Sadly, Cheryl, I think we're dealing with a federal government right now that doesn't understand the difference between regulation, restriction, and destruction. And the path we're headed down on, I think we'll all live to regret very soon.
I don't really think many people, if there's anyone, knows exactly how this thing is going to work out and exactly what it's going to look like. In our case, in order to communicate with our constituency, if you will, we've had forums where we've had providers in addition to the businesses that we have, and it's an exchange. And I'm not sure the providers don't learn more from the other side of the table, but it's going to be very, very unusual or interesting to see how it works out.
You get about 15 seconds apiece to weigh in.
Just quickly, I mean, our state chamber is starting a task force next week, and they've asked some of the metro chambers to participate on this Medicaid expansion issue. It was a hot potato last year. We need some clarity around what really makes sense and how you go forward. But, you know, we're trying to do, Pat, as you're trying to do, and that's just bring people together and try to answer questions best we can. There's still so many unknowns.
Great. Harvey, you get the last word on this.
Bottom line, it's been a depressing element on the economy. The fact that we don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to come down or what it's going to cost is costing us jobs. And the sooner we get to some resolution, one way or the other, the better it's going to be for the economy.
That's fantastic. And that is the last word for the day. Thank you, gentlemen. Nice to see you here in South Carolina.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Nice to see our folks from North Carolina. Let's put our projections on the future for growth in both of the Carolinas so that we all prosper. It's been a joy having you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.